All right, it's 10 o'clock. Big warm welcome to all of you out there in cyberspace, or in the future when you watch this. Welcome to the second webinar for this academic course of 2026. My name is Sam, and I'm from Wellington, New Zealand, but my life is now in Spain, and I live and work here in San Sebastian, and work for London School of Languages as a teacher and teacher trainer. And I'll be taking you through today's webinar, which is all about, as you can see on the screen, why pronunciation matters. Let's go. So, what are we going to cover? To begin with, we're going to start with a brief overview of the current state of affairs with teaching pronunciation. After that, we'll briefly touch upon the key features of pronunciation, what you need to be aware of as a teacher and how these are typically represented, the phonetic chart, for example. And then next, we'll look at several key reasons as to why pronunciation matters. The main purpose of this very webinar, in fact. And we'll go into detail about why we should include it in our teaching and/or increase the amount of it. And then, since we've said I've said, important it is, it's only natural to go over a few ways to practice it, or if the case may be, increase, your pronunciation focus in the classroom. And lastly, a brief summary of the key points from today's webinar, as well as time for some questions at the end, should you have any. So let's get started. So just a cautionary note before we begin. What I'm about to say is not backed up by, I guess, official research, like from Cambridge University, but instead comes from classroom observations over the past few years, and also discussions with teachers, like in between classes, kind of getting their feel for things, as well as social networking events that have, about EFL. But the point is, they all lead to the fact that pronunciation seems to be a little neglected in the classroom. The long-lost cousin of speaking, or the system that keeps trying to get attention, waving its hands from the back and saying, "Hey, look at me. I matter too." So in a nutshell, it seems that, pronunciation could definitely do with a little more care and attention in the classroom. But why is this the case? How has it come to be that such an important element of language learning has been shunted aside for what? More important things like exam technique? Pronunciation, it's not that it's not an active element of teaching. And if you think about it, it's very much an active teaching component. You know, there's drilling, speaking, and you can even have movement. But there is something that's causing this sort of distinct lack of explicit focus from what I've seen as a teacher trainer observing teachers. So first of all, consider your course book and think about how much specific attention there is regarding pronunciation. And I bet you that in the majority of your course books, there is nothing more than like a token mention every now and then, usually tucked away in a corner somewhere and easily skipped over for the meatier parts of the lesson. And of course, as teachers, if we're pushed for time, which can happen, that's usually the part that's going to get dropped. Admittedly, the case for me sometimes. And so just to show you what I mean, here are a few examples from coursebook pages of different levels that we're currently working with, just to show you what I mean. So here is one from a B1 coursebook about a vocabulary lesson about noun suffixes. And naturally, if you're looking at this, this would require a focus on the stress patterns of these suffixes. But if you look at it, there's nothing there that explicitly tells you that. And so the onus is on the teacher to recognize that and then duly deliver the necessary drilling and the knowledge for the pronunciation of that. I will say occasionally the teacher's book mentions something, but in this case, for this page, they just say drill the words. So to have that knowledge for pronunciation, the teacher needs it. Okay, another example. This is also from the same B1 coursebook. And actually, after going through all of the pages, the only time that the phonetic alphabet is actually shown is here on page 63 in the entire, well, out of all the units. So I guess not exactly a sort of ringing endorsement for the teacher needing to know the phonetic alphabet. Although there is one place where there is a specific mention of pronunciation done regularly, and that is at the back of the book in the grammar reference area. And ideally, teachers would spend time on this, but from experience and observing teachers, as mentioned earlier, this is the part that's often left out. They'll focus on the controlled practice, the ones you can see there just to the left, and the pronunciation, sort of less so. So this is B1. Let's have a look at C1, for example, where again we have another vocabulary lesson about suffixes. There we go. But like the B1, the teacher has to be able to see that, okay, we've got suffixes, there are some stress pattern rules here that I can teach with pronunciation, but there's nothing there that sort of explicitly tells the teacher that they need this knowledge. But same again, when you go to the back of the book for the grammar reference part that each unit has, there is always a section regarding pronunciation there. So it exists, but sort of limited. All right. Okay. So yeah, another reason why there might be this sort of lack of focus on pronunciation at the moment is that there's this assumption that as teachers, yeah, we're going to do our job correctly and include it as part of the course when we deliver our lesson. So for example, with a vocabulary lesson, you always need the MFP trifecta. That is, focus on meaning, form, and you guessed it, pronunciation. Yet, as mentioned earlier, from observing teachers, one of the most frequent reminders in our action points is to remember to include that pronunciation. And a further recurring comment that we often make here is that is to point out the numerous moments which present themselves as opportunities where a teacher could focus on pronunciation, but more often than not, they might let it slide. And then in the debrief afterwards, when we ask why wasn't that picked up? Typical answers might be a sort of lack of confidence in being able to do it properly. And this might stem from not having the knowledge or being prepared for it, such as when you plan your lesson, you might omit that stage. Or others might explain that they prioritize fluency over accuracy. And if the message gets across, then all is well. What's the deal with pronunciation? So, okay, to a certain extent, sure. I mean, understanding is crucial, but it could just be so much better if pronunciation were a more prominent feature of the teaching of the lesson. And lastly, a possible final reason for the limited focus on pronunciation is the exam culture surrounding a lot of language classes these days. I do realize that can obviously depend on where you teach or the classes you have, but when you have an exam class, there is often this sort of emphasis on passing the skills required, the reading, the listening, the writing, the speaking, and yeah, apart from a minor category, a minor sort of category in the speaking rubric when they do the exam, there's no other explicit mention of pronunciation there. And so here I am giving this webinar to gently remind you or encourage you to see that pronunciation has the potential to be an integral part of our lessons. that it does matter, the purpose of this webinar. And we'll dive into why soon enough. But before we do that, yes, there are a few things that you should keep in mind. And these are that when dealing with pronunciation, you're going to be dealing with pronunciation features. And you remember that point about lacking knowledge? This usually sort of links to that. And though you don't have to be an expert, it certainly does help to know the basic terminology and mechanisms that underlie this area of teaching. So, in Gerald Kelly's useful book, How to Teach Pronunciation, aptly titled, there's a fairly straightforward flowchart diagram, the one you can see on screen here, which breaks down a lot of individual terms that language teachers should be familiar with. And now, I'm not going to explain all of what you can see here, but I'm sort of merely using it to show you that pronunciation is more complex than just sounds. There is depth to what goes on. For example, leading the way with phonemes, which are the individual sounds of a language, these are split into, as you can see, vowels and consonants. But then, as you can see, they're split again into further subcategories. And even again, for single vowels, they go down into long and short vowels. So, yeah, it's important to know the difference beyond merely vowel, consonant. And then, when sounds are put together, they form words. And words can create sentences, and this all leads to text and dialogue. And here on the other side, you can see the suprasegmental features, and these consist of intonation and stress, and the rhythm of the sentence, and in other words, well, yeah, stress. And this is when we can apply emphasis to both words and sentences. And finally, sort of linked to this, there is also connected speech, which is all about how sounds change when there is a stream, like what you're listening to right now. It's just a stream of sound. And that's another area where it's necessary to know some of the terminology related to pronunciation. And here you have terms like catenation, assimilation, intrusion, and more. All of which knowledge of can help our students better their pronunciation and improve their understanding at the same time. All right, what else? Well, besides this jargon, there's also the IPA, not a bear, but actually the International Phonetic Alphabet, sort of often seen as a chart like this. And this is used to represent the sounds of the English language. All the categories of the aforementioned vowels and consonants can be found here. And their phonemes, their sounds, are represented by different symbols. And while it might seem like a bit like a random collection, there is great logic as to how it is all mapped out and where each phoneme lies on the chart. Some have example words like what you can see here. For example, green, the E symbol, or the E there's the word green. All right. And some even have pictures so students can sort of see the sound and make a connection visually. And yes, this is an extremely useful tool to help students see whether the phoneme is maybe voiced or unvoiced, so whether there's vibration in the throat or not, or to distinguish between those long and short vowels, as we saw before. And for example, the vowels here in the top left quadrant, they can actually be mapped onto the mouth to help see where they are produced in the mouth. So as you can see, front, back, center. And so as the teacher, this is really useful because you can help your students feel exactly where the sound is coming from and then how to contrast it with other similar but different sounds simply by moving the lips or the jaw, whether it says close or mid or open. So this is all about the jaw here. But also the tongue is involved as well. And so as a teacher, yes, you should be familiar with the basic physiology of the mouth and how certain parts are positioned to allow the air to move through or not, as sometimes the case may be. And this is really, really important for students whose L1 does not have similar sounds because maybe they have to actually physically learn the English ones. And as teachers, we have to deliver that knowledge all about that physiology of the mouth. Oh, here we go as well. Yes. So all the terms, you can sort of break it down to the what's going on. All right. And this brings us to focus on five concrete reasons as to why pronunciation matters so much. And these reasons, they apply across all levels and ages. And, well, I know you can see the podium right there on the screen, but the reasons that will be given, there is no particular order here. There's no gold medal to such and such a reason. Equality is what we believe in here. So, first of all, let's see. There is pronunciation's impact on other language skills. By that, I mean the knock-on effect it can have on like reading, writing, listening, speaking, all of them. And I know you might be thinking that, okay, sure, it can affect speaking, but, reading, well, let me explain. When you read, the words come alive in your head. You're pronouncing them as you think they're said, but I guess silently. And if you don't know how a word is pronounced, your fluency is actually going to decrease because you're going to pause each time you try to figure out how to say it up here. Or on the flip side, what could happen is that you might even think you know how a word is pronounced, but unfortunately, you might have learned it incorrectly. And so therefore, what happens in this case is you end up reinforcing that incorrect form every time you read the word. And we don't want that to happen. And similarly with writing, we often hear what we want to write in that little voice that resides in our heads, and then we write down how we think, we hear it. And so students who have difficulty with pronunciation actually usually struggle with spelling too. And this can come down to the fact that pronunciation isn't being practiced enough in the classroom, especially in the early stages of learning a language. And needless to say, this confusion, sort of in the thinking you know how a word is pronounced and then spelt, can be perfect fodder for jokes or clever plays on words. And here is a classic Gary Larson cartoon, where the ooh phoneme has been confused for the letter U instead of the double O in food, which makes the same sound. And you might also see these sort of things doing the rounds where there's a poem or something that they go on about all the tricky exceptions and irregularities of the English language, when in actual fact, the majority of English is fairly standardized and rule-based. The issue is that some of the exceptions are amongst some of the most frequently used words in the language. And so, yes, of course, they can be problematic. And then there is listening. And difficulties here can often arise when students think they know how a word is pronounced, but then they can't identify it when it is spoken, when they're listening. This applies to both words by themselves, but also in connected speech when there's that stream of sound. And students need to be aware of, yes, how sounds change when they are said within that stream of sound. And it might be different to how that word is pronounced in isolation. And so here, I mean, clearly pronunciation matters with regard to all the skills. I mean, that's quite a bit. That could be sort of reason enough if I've convinced you in its importance. But as you know, there are going to be four more reasons. So let's find out. All right. Next up, yes, there is the significant influence that pronunciation has on oh, I'm gonna struggle saying this now. Intelligibility. I should have practiced before. A lot of teaching nowadays is communicative, and students want to be, or they want to understand and they want to be understood. And now, whether that is in the classroom environment or out in the big wide world, the point is that being able to communicate with someone in another language is a huge deal in most language learners' journeys. And then, if any problems or misunderstandings occur due to incorrect pronunciation, it can be incredibly demotivating for students and possibly hinder their progress. And so oh, here we go. Yes, being understood, um, or understanding. All right. So let's look at minimal pairs, for example. And this is where a word might differ by just one phoneme, one sound. So if you switch out one for another, you're going to actually end up saying a completely different word. And so, for example, here with these minimal pairs of E, is the first one, or I, short vowel, um, we can look at similar sentences, but change the phoneme, and it's completely different. And these can be quite fun to play around with, though obviously not if you are not understood. And I mean, context will hopefully identify which utterance was said, but not always. For example, look out for that sheep. You might be in New Zealand on a farm. Look out for that ship. I mean, okay, you're in the water, sure. Um, this is for having a bit of fun. But there are times when change one sound, it might actually be a bit confusing. All right. And it's not just the wrong phonemes that can cause misunderstandings. Or misunderstandings can also arise out of incorrect stress, be that a word or a sentence. And so this is because English is a stress-timed language. We give emphasis to stress and emphasis to stress. Well, stress is important because it can convey meaning and how we say something. It's not just, yeah, how we say it, but, you know, it's not just what we say, but how we say it. There we go, the right way. And so intonation clues are a really important facet of pronunciation that students need to be aware of. For example, simple sentence, I love you. All right, but if I say it, I love you, it's like, I want you to know this. I really love you. But if I say, I love you, I'm giving emphasis to the you and, I love you, and obviously not someone else. I love you. I love you. It's like, me is the one that loves you, and that other person doesn't. So, same sentence, subtle change of stress on a different word, and we kind of conveying a different meaning. And so, in short, pronunciation can be key to understanding and being able to, yeah, communicate effectively. All right, number three. Pronunciation also matters in avoiding error fossilization. That is to say, if pronunciation errors aren't corrected, the error can then become internalized as the correct way to say it. And this can lead to misunderstandings, as I mentioned in the previous point. But it can also make it much harder for the teacher to write this error. And so the point is that pronunciation work needs to be done at the point of learning, with the drilling and the pointing out any tricky features. And the errors also need to be corrected, and this could be on the spot or delayed, as the case may be. So, in order to avoid them becoming fossilized, we don't want pronunciation errors to become fossilized. All right. Short and sharp there. Short and sweet, sorry. All right. And another reason pronunciation matters is that the sounds or phonemes, to use the official term of English, can differ from students' L1, their own language. And when this is the case, students have to work doubly hard to ensure that they are using the correct muscles and tongue and lip position to cause the right type of airflow, because otherwise they won't be pronouncing the correct phoneme. And as we've seen, this can then lead to misunderstandings and error fossilization can occur. So pronunciation is physical, and this is why the teaching is absolutely crucial. Pronunciation doesn't just sort of magically happen by osmosis. Students simply sitting there in the classroom and hearing the sounds from the teacher. No, they, the students, have to use their own mouths and be taught how to use them over and over again if necessary to get a feel for the correct way of pronunciation. And for this to be done right, the teacher also needs the appropriate knowledge. A simple analogy is that it's like going to the gym, for the first time. Like you have to strengthen your muscles in order to be able to achieve your goals. And this can only happen with time and practice. It's not instant. And also, you need to be shown how to correctly use the equipment or the machines. Learning how to produce language is exactly the same. It takes time, it takes practice to get there. All right. And last but not least is the current classroom practice. And this refers to the fact that we know pronunciation matters because it can affect what we do in our classrooms and the planning that goes into our lessons, or it should. Classrooms are spaces where learning should occur. And as teachers, we have to create that environment. One where students aren't afraid to make mistakes and that they can freely practice, what we're teaching. And therefore, to encourage that, pronunciation should be a regular feature of any lesson, not like an afterthought. And so that so that students lose any fear that they might have of being able to speak up. And therefore, class time is maximized. Because for some students, it might be the only time they get to practice that language with others. And so, I guess in saying that, how can class time be, maximized to include pronunciation? Well, I mean, we've gone through why it matters. So, in the next section of the webinar is all about how to include pronunciation in your teaching, how to go about practicing it, no matter what the content is. And as I stated at the start of this webinar, as a teacher trainer who observes teachers all the time, if the following stages or suggestions are included in the lesson, they would make a real difference to a student's pronunciation ability. Because, say it with me, it matters. Pronunciation matters. Okay. So, to begin with, Pronunciation should definitely be practiced when introducing new language. This is obviously the case in vocabulary and grammar lessons, but it also applies to emergent language too. There should be this focus on meaning, or MFP, that's the meaning, the form, and pronunciation. But what happens is that teachers will often do the meaning and the form, but then go straight onto the controlled practice because it's the next thing in the course book. But just because there isn't any explicit pronunciation included, it should still be an integral part of the lesson, part of the teaching. And most easily, this comes in the form of drilling, whereby the teacher models the word a few times. Then you get the class to copy you. This is known as choral drilling. And the cherry on the top then is to call out a few individuals as a general check. Well, sorry, I've got there T T C C do do do. I. This is like teacher, teacher, class, class, the choral, choral, and then individual, individual, individual. Doesn't have to be done like that every time, but it's a nice sort of rhythm to get into. Boom, 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 boom. Okay. And yes, it shouldn't take long. You make it snappy. You get into this rhythm with it, and students, generally they enjoy this. They get into it. You're repeating that new language. And for little ones, you can even sort of do it in a slightly fun way, where you drill the words loudly or quietly, angrily, and so on. All right. And of course, when introducing new language, don't forget to point out important features like stress, the stress in a word, or silent letters, or alternative spellings to sounds. We shouldn't have this assumption that students will just see it and automatically pick up on it. There needs to be this explicit focus done by the teacher on things. For example, tennis. There's that stress there because it might differ from the student's L1. Or knee, there's the silent letter K. It's not knee. Or the difference between goes and does. Okay. But the same spelling. Yes. All right. Another common way to practice pronunciation in the classroom is by correcting students' errors. Now, there might be an element of feeling bad about this. All right, you're correcting someone, but you know, this is an essential part of the learning process. You shouldn't feel bad, and the student shouldn't feel embarrassed. And how to overcome that is that the classroom environment, as mentioned before, needs to be that safe space where students have no fear in being corrected, nor ashamed for making a mistake. And when correcting a student, there are these two typical ways to correct a pronunciation error. You can either do it on the spot, that's like there and then, as the student is saying it, or as a delayed error correction stage, where this is where you're doing the task, the student is speaking, but once the activity has finished, then you're going to focus on that error during feedback. And yes, this is usually employed so that you don't interrupt the flow of the task. The student is able to maintain fluency. And if it happens to be a common error, one that maybe you hear all students making, then it's worth pointing it out, drawing explicit attention to it, so that the whole class can benefit. One thing to point out, though, that from observations, a lot of pronunciation errors, sort of in language lessons, seem to come from the teacher, not having included that pronunciation stage, that they had the meaning, they had the form, but then they dropped the pronunciation stage. And so when you include it at the point of learning, you would then avoid sort of that constant correction later in the lesson when you should be focusing on other pronunciation errors. Or maybe you might have to correct one about the language, but not the constant correction that seems to happen when a teacher forgets to include pronunciation at that point of learning. And one last tip, when you're monitoring and really listening carefully for any errors, it helps to have a notebook or notepad, piece of paper, with you to write down anything you hear. Because otherwise, you then end up relying on memory. And yeah, it can easily get overwhelmed. You're going around the class and you hear something here at the start of the activity, but by the time you get to the end, are you going to remember that first thing? Not sure. So yeah, always have something to write down those errors as you hear them. All right. Another way to practice pronunciation, and this was mentioned earlier, is that pronunciation is directly linked to other skills like, yes, reading and listening. So before a reading or listening activity is a good moment to focus on some pronunciation. And this means that when you know you're going to have a reading or a listening task in class, as part of your lesson planning, you should go over those texts beforehand to identify any words that are likely to cause problems. And not just because they might be unknown, but also due to their pronunciation. So it's like the student might recognize the word. They actually might know it, if they see it on the page, but maybe, they can't identify it when hearing it. Um, or vice versa. So they need to know that sort of sound spelling connection. And whether that comes from, yeah, maybe a silent letter or irregular, well, alternative spellings, or even connected speech features. So as a teacher, yeah, do your planning properly. And with that, it can mean that there might be a pre-teaching stage so that when students come across the word in the task, they're then able to uh, understand it, and therefore their reading or listening ability sort of won't be affected. They'll be able to recognize it. And next up, we're going back to basics and working on individual phonemes. And this could occur, as we saw before, during the presentation of new language in the pronunciation stage. Or with your planning, you might predict that students will struggle with such and such a sound, maybe because it doesn't occur in their L1. Or again, you might be listening out for errors and you notice that students are struggling with a certain sound and it needs proper attention. So yeah, this work on individual phonemes can come from sort of different directions. And this is where it might get physical. Should have had Dua Lipa's song. Okay. Anyway, that is where your knowledge of how the mouth works and its physiology for each phoneme, where to place the tongue, the shape of the lips, how the air flows through the mouth. These are all elements that you would need as a teacher to be able to accurately model and then have students be able to produce the correct sound. Or not just model, but teach, be able to, talk about it, use the right terminology or what is appropriate, for the students. Mirrors can actually come in handy here, so students can sort of see themselves. I guess phones nowadays would work the same. So they can see what's going on, sort of looking at the shape or, the jaw. Yeah. And obviously, yes, repetition with what they're doing again and again. And a nice little activity to do here is lip reading, where this is where students can work in pairs to produce the sounds, but they can do it silently. So just reading the lips. and their peer has to guess what is being said. Also, as you can see there, minimal pair work. So anything related to minimal pairs is also useful for working on individual sounds, because it's that one sound, that one phoneme that makes the difference in what is being said. As is being able to identify the sound in other words, and even more challenging when there are sort of alternative spellings for the same sound. And these are things, yes, that you can work on, all for that individual phoneme. Lastly, it's also, yeah, a great chance to sort of play with that sound as well. Have fun with it. Simple challenges like tongue twisters, all those things that are difficult to say, say this 10 times quickly. Or the broken telephone where this, maybe a word or, okay, a sound goes through the class. Is it going to end up the same as what you said at the start? Um, so apart from drilling and that sort of repetition, you can also, yeah, play with it a bit more. All right. And so, yeah, to conclude, I guess any targeted pronunciation work like this is then likely to have this positive knock-on effect for all the words that contain that sound. As, yeah, these words will then hopefully be pronounced correctly or identified accurately, across the board. So working on individual phonemes is a key thing to do when practicing pronunciation. Right. And finally, we have connected speech, raising awareness of connected speech. And making time to focus on this is definitely worthwhile because if students are aware of any sound changes, such as the vowel reduction, which can happen in like many function words. This is where the vowel, I guess you could say, goes from the strong form to the weak form. And it usually changes to a schwa. So what you're looking at here, like, um, well, a strong the, but the, or to, where you got that oo, but it might change to a ta, or of, but of, or even so these the, to, of, when we're in connected speech, when we've got that stream of sound, they often get reduced to that sort of the sound. And yeah, students when listening, if they're aware of it, it can make listening so much easier. As well, if they're aware of it, then yeah, they can understand, they can follow that stream of sound. But also, it's not just listening. Switching to the skill of speaking, when you produce connected speech when speaking, the students are going to sound much more fluent. And obviously helps, like when the students are speaking, this is as a teacher, we need to monitor closely. And maybe this is when you need to point out, oh, you could have contracted that, or give less emphasis to the to, not the strong form. You need to use the weak form. So this is with our monitoring and pointing out any opportunities, or maybe that delayed feedback stage as mentioned. And then you can practice it again. Same goes for reading or listening activities. For example, if the students are reading a dialogue, a good activity is to try and identify where any connected speech occurs. Same goes with, I guess, the listening audio script, maybe afterwards or even before. Like, where do you think what connected speech features can you identify? And then you listen out for it when it happens. Classic dictations also work really well, to raise awareness of these features. So that whole write down what you hear and then go over what happened or why it was difficult. And so, yeah, this was the sort of, I guess, a brief list on how to include pronunciation on a regular basis in your lessons. Um, so these ideas can all be really useful to, well, to include or maybe increase the pronunciation work that goes on in the classroom. There are obviously a lot of other things you can do. And so, if you want to sort of investigate this a bit further, there are some useful resources that contain a lot of, or books, I mean, here, that contain a lot of maybe the theory, the knowledge to help deliver that knowledge, I guess, or impart that knowledge to our students. So, these are a couple of ones that in my teaching I've used or had to go to find out yeah, about the, I guess, the shape of the mouth and how sounds are articulated, or just even consolidating your knowledge as a teacher. They also give some activities as well. And apart from those two, here are a couple of other classics. Pronunciation practice activities. It's just a book, chock-a-block of different pronunciation activities that can be kind of sometimes used as a filler or at the end of class as a bit of fun. So you can kind of put them in, every now and then. Ship or Sheep, fantastic one that focuses a lot on different sounds in there. Um, I will say that, yeah, I'm not endorsed by any of these publishers. These are just some books that in my teaching career I've found particularly useful, and no doubt there are others out there too. Here, where I work, I will say we often use some books by Mark Hancock. That's his website right there. And these books here are ones that well, I dip in and out of sometimes. And there's even one specific to working in Spain. So some of the common errors or common sounds that Spanish speakers need to work on, that book there really targets those. So, yeah, there's a lot of resources out there. I guess as a teacher, it's just, go and explore, see what's there, and hopefully there'll be something useful for you in some of those, or from this webinar, obviously, about why pronunciation matters. And so here we are. Yes, we're sort of about to wrap up with the conclusion. And so, yeah, just a few things, just to remind you about why pronunciation is so important and that, yes, it must be included in language classes and actively worked on. As you've seen, there are different ways to do that. But please do not assume that students are just going to pick it up, that they're just by being there, hearing you or hearing a listening. Yeah, it doesn't work like that. Pronunciation needs to be actively worked on. And as a teacher, we need to be aware of our teaching context. And so this is the preparation that goes on, the lesson planning, that you should be aware of, yeah, the likely errors from what you've looked at on the page. What errors might students make with maybe identifying or when pronouncing new words? And obviously, this means that those sort of this predicting means that you're going to have opportunities to work on it. And so keep that in mind. And yes, remember, it's not just about producing sounds correctly. That is important, but pronunciation knowledge can also help with students understanding. They're listening. They're going to identify language better in that stream of speech. Yeah, it has an effect on other skills as well. I mean, the reading, the listening, the writing, and of course, speaking. And therefore, as a teacher, yes, you should invest in your own understanding, your own knowledge about pronunciation. And this will definitely pay off in your ability to teach it properly. Knowing the IPA, being able to put it up there on the board, being able to correctly describe the place of articulation and be able to show it with the shape of the lips. That is all something as a teacher that you need that knowledge. And I can't stress that enough. And so, really, there you have it. In a nutshell, pronunciation matters. Wow, there we go. And so that means we are at question and answer time. So I'll just leave it for a moment, see if anyone out there in that big wide world of cyberspace has a question, has a doubt about anything. Please type it in the chat box. And if there's anything that you're not sure about, I'll endeavor to give my best answer. If not, might have to go to one of those books sitting here beside me. Give it one more minute. That's all right. I think it's a quiet morning this morning. Okay, so yeah, that about wraps it up for today. But before I sign off, remember that we have all our previous webinars on the platform, just sitting there waiting for you to enjoy. And next month as well, there is going to be the webinar that you can see on your screen here titled How Etymology Can Help Us in the Classroom. And this is going to be delivered by Inigo Cassis. So it's sure to be an interesting and entertaining and informative webinar for you to enjoy. Pencil it in your diaries now. I will be for sure. So thank you for listening. Has been a pleasure hosting you today once again. If you have any further questions, please feel free to email me at sam@london-school.com. This webinar will also be uploaded, yes, on our platform at London School of Languages. So yeah, if there's anything you've missed or you want to go back and check something, it'll be there forever. And yes, I guess I'll be there forever. And we also have our social media platforms where there'll be, regular sort of interesting tips and articles and things going on here, or that go on here at London School of Languages. So definitely check those out as well. And well, now we have well and truly come to the end of our webinar. So thank you very much once again. Have a great weekend, and I look forward to seeing you in the future. Bye bye.